in my opinion. So, and our speaker is awesome, so we want to make sure we don't interrupt him. If you have any questions, please write them down. Try not to interrupt our speaker unless he says you can. Okay? And Brandon's usually pretty good about that. If he gets to something that he feels you might have a question for, he'll say, like, what do you think? Or something. Okay? So watch his cues, but if not, please write your questions down and wait till the end to ask them. Do not interrupt anybody else, please. We have had that happen in the past. We don't want to have to ask you to leave because you're being disruptive. So please don't make us do that. Okay?
Before we do that, let me just ask before we get started, is there anybody here from the Defensive Language Institute or that's associated?
I'm retired.
Okay,
Awesome.
And your name is?
Doretta Chakota.
Doretta, it's good to have you here. And Ellen? Good to have both of you here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And just one more thing. We usually have coffee and water. We will. I'm usually not the one that takes care of that. It's my husband. And he had to work today. So I had to send somebody out to bring coffee so we can make some coffee, put some ice for the water. But there are pastries. If you want pastries, we have a lot. So please come and get some. Okay? Now, without further ado, our amazing speaker is the host of one of the greatest podcasts out there that has to do with San Antonio and Texas, a history of old Texas. And actually, Brandon, I'm on my 4th time listening to the whole thing all over again.
Does it get better? Yeah.
I find something new every time I listen to it. He has been a great supporter to us. He also has been instrumental in looking for the Battle of Medina. We're going to have you back for that, the Battle of Medina site. So without further ado, please help me welcome the fantastic, the greatest ever, Brandon Seale.
Thanks, appreciate it. Thank you. Well, thank you guys. Good morning. So my podcast that I produce is called A New History of Old Texas. But those of you who have followed it for a while know that the first season and the original name of the podcast was A New History of Old San Antonio. It was dedicated specifically to the story of the founding of San Antonio until the arrival of the railroad. And the goal was to tell it as one continuous story, which is, of course, how the people lived it. I'll qualify the introduction I just got from Diane that every subsequent season of the podcast has been, in some way, shape, or form, an attempt to fix a mistake I made in a previous season. Because when you go through this, and when you publish all this very publicly, you learn very quickly all the things that are wrong and all the things that you thought were true that aren't. So it's been a learning process as I go through. And so today I'm going to come back and kind of revisit that first topic that I did, which was founding San Antonio, a new history of old San Antonio, but through the lens in particular of some of the work that Diane and Margot and some other groups have been doing, and frankly even some of my own research going deeper into the indigenous side of San Antonio history. And so, the impetus initially for the podcast was, I feel like a lot of us who do love our city, who love San Antonio, that sometimes, we struggle to articulate precisely what it is that we like about it. We have some vague notion that it's its history or it's something historical about it, but I also think sometimes, we cringe a little bit to be defined by a touristy river walk or by, falling old 300-year-old buildings or something like that. But the argument that I make, and that I don't think I'll have any trouble convincing you guys of, is that there's a lot more to those symbols even than I think most of us appreciate and think of. And I start with the Riverwalk. That, the idea, the Riverwalk is the place that birthed this city. We're one of the few cities, or it's unique the extent to which San Antonio has a relationship with its water. There would not be a million, 2 million people living here if we didn't have these really unique hydrological resources. And more specifically, obviously the archaeological record supports, for 15,000 years or longer, there's been human beings living here. But what I think is really interesting when you go back and start to visit the historic record, the written records that come with the first Spanish entradas into the region, to really read closely in between the lines about what they're finding there when they get here. The first word that I kind of re-encountered recently in the last year that I glossed over the first time was one of the first entradas in 1789 or 1791, right to that area, talks about the native groups here as tending to their gardens. And that word gardens, it's a word that implies agriculture. It implies, even in some sense, in some ways they use it sometimes, irrigation or some forms of irrigation, which is a different thought than I feel like a lot of us have. You know, that initially when I approach the story of the founding of San Antonio, we're thinking of San Antonio starting with the arrival of the Spanish in 1718, with the founding of the Alamo, with Mission San Antonio de Valero. But really, there's all these clues that there was a much more substantial occupation going on here at that time and prior to that. And then you start to look at some other clues, too, as to what's going on when they get here. For one, within the Mission Indian communities, there are so many languages represented. Literally hundreds of languages represented. It's a disproportionate number of languages for such a small place. And then you step back and you look at the larger macro picture about what's happened, or what's happening, or what's happened from 1500 to about 1690, 1700. And what you realize what was going on in San Antonio in the 1600s and into the early 1700s is it's basically a refugee community. It's a refugee community for a lot of different native groups. You know, the San Antonio, Yanaguana, the Riverwalk, the Spirit Waters had always kind of sat at this confluence of the Plains Indian worlds, the East Indian worlds, the Northern Mexico, the Mesoamerican worlds, and that was kind of its niche as a trading hub. But what that also means too, it's the furthest removed in some way from the initial colonial pressures that are coming from Europe. You know, it's quite far removed from the first Spanish landings in Mesoamerica and Mexico. It's quite far removed from the French and even the English landings. And so it becomes kind of this place of refuge. And what I think that changes a little bit too how we think about the mission Indian experience in particular is, you know, when the missions start getting founded here, 1718, 1721, through the 1730s, you know, what's really going on is the Spanish are capturing, in a sense, this movement of people that's already happening, this recongregation of people. And ultimately, the word that, I guess, the fancy word for it that we use is ethnogenesis, this birth of a new people that's happening at this spot right here in San Antonio. Because what you also have to explain when you go back and look at it is the unique success, and I want to put an asterisk on that and come back to it, but the unique success of the San Antonio missions. The Spanish found 50 some odd missions throughout the current borders of Texas. Most of them are very short-lived. They are, if not outright, abysmal failures, or they are outright openly opposed and run off within a couple years. The Spanish mission experience here in San Antonio is something quite different. Now, we qualify that on the one hand, it seems that the Spanish presence, at least initially, it's not entirely unwelcome. And that can probably be explained by the trade benefits, there's mutual protection benefits. You know, you're in this a little bit post-apocalyptic world where people are looking for looking for refuge. I don't need to explain to you guys, obviously, the impact of European diseases that wipe through North America are quite extreme. You know, they're wiping out whole family groups, whole tribes. You know, the other an interesting fact that we can look to the historical record, when Cabeza de Vaca comes through this part of the world in the 1530s, he can't travel more than a day or two without coming upon another village, another collection of people. By the time the Spanish entradas are coming here in the 1780s and 90s and early 1700s, they're calling at least the region south of here the despoblada, the unpopulated region. So you can see there's been a major shift of what's happened and what's gone on. But with all this dislocation, there's some alignment of interest that happens in a unique way in San Antonio. Really, the only thing that's close to this is maybe Juarez and El Paso in that area. Those missions also are kind of similarly successful, but they're very disconnected. Although I'll note, something else they had in common was they had irrigation, or agriculture, and perhaps some form of irrigation before the arrival of the Spaniards. So there's some similarities there going on. Now, the flip side, of course, too, to talking about the San Antonio mission experience is it's also not entirely consensual, or there's a component of coercion that's going on to this too that increasingly is coming out in the scholarship, and then increasingly, you know, we acknowledge. There's been a really good paper, I can't remember who wrote it now, who went back and analyzed the average caloric intake of what mission Indians were, how much they were eating each day, and it's abysmal. I mean, it's almost like concentration camp levels. You know, it's like 1,200, 1,300 calories a day. While they're working, you know, out in the fields all day and stuff too. And when you look at the statistics too, the survival statistics of families and of mission Indians, they're also abysmal. I mean, the life expectancy inside these missions is inexplicably terrible. And so, and the other proof we have of this also too is the friars are always negotiating with the Spanish military contingent here for soldiers, typically to kind of serve as almost like overseers or to track down mission Indians that have fled. And so there's something strange about this relationship, because there are places where you have outright opposition from the native groups to the presence of these Spanish missions, and they run them off very quickly. You don't quite have that here, but it's also probably misleading to think of it as just some kind of kumbaya, utopia scene too. There's something complicated in that relationship. Nevertheless, it's from the very beginning, and really for the first 100 years of San Antonio's history, San Antonio is, in every sense, a majority indigenous community, which is also kind of unique in the North American, meaning north of the Rio Grande kind of experience. Even Santa Fe is not even quite like that. And so, it's a mixed community. The other factor that really colors the experience here in Texas is the horse, right? That we have the domestication of the horse. The horse shortens the distances of the plains and shortens the distances down into Mesoamerica and over into East Texas. And it's the arrival and the domestication of this horse in the late 1600s and the 1700s that's also going on at the same time and accelerating some of these movements of people and frankly, accelerating some of the conflicts. I don't know what you're telling me. Oh, is the councilwoman here? Oh my God, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. Councilwoman Villagrán just joined us, so yeah.
I would love to have you guys, and they have my information, reach out to my office if y'all have any questions, or if you want to share a story, because we do a weekly class, and we are going to talk about how we have these meetings, and if you learn anything new, we would love to include that on there. So
I'm so sorry, you were incognita back there. I couldn't recognize you with the hat and the glasses. Thank you for joining us.
The southeast side. So the other the four missions are in the Alamo or in District 3.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And so, with all of this tumult, with the arrival of the Spanish, with the horse turbocharging these interactions, for a solid 100 years too, San Antonio is the most contested point on the continent too. It's terribly violent. And historians like to fixate on this fact of it because battles are easy to quantify. There's a date it happens on, there's casualties, there's tactics. But what they often overlook was that San Antonio is also the location of some of the most ambitious Native American peace treaties that are made by any colonial power during this period. So one of the biggest and largest we talk about is 1745. There's this enormous peace council and peace treaty with the Lipan Apaches in particular, between the Spanish and the Lipan Apaches, that's accompanied by the marriage of something like 200 Lipan Apaches, Mission Indians, and pobladores and residents of old San Antonio itself. And this is a peace and a relationship that is never perfect, but is sustained and comes to characterize a lot of the relationship here. In 1785, you have a similar effort and a similar peace treaty with the Comanches. And so what is really unique and gets overlooked by the glamour or the gore of battles is that San Antonio in its early years is living very much as a trading town. It's living off of Native American trade. The people that live here, yes, they're raising crops, they're planting gardens, but what they're making money on, what they're living on is this trade largely with Native North America. The Comanches have a permanent lodge inside San Antonio. It was the largest building in San Antonio at one point, where they come and it's like, keeping a condo at the beach or something like that. It's where they come and stay every time they come to San Antonio. The Lipan Apaches as well. There's a designated Apache Alasan Court sits on the area that was designated for the Lipan Apaches during the colonial period when they would come and trade here and reside here. And it's not, the Apaches and the Comanches are the largest, but this is going on with the Tonkawas and the Wichitas and all these other groups. And of course, too, the presence of the Mission Indians all along, too. So this is also what's going on in this ethnogenesis, is that as these other groups are coming in, they're intermarrying with these Mission Indians who are, intermarrying with pobladores and with residents of San Antonio. But because San Antonio is so oriented toward the trade of the plains and toward the trade of Native America, they become kind of a constant thorn in the side of Spanish administrators and Spanish tax collectors. The Spanish trade system was very mercantilistic. It's all oriented back toward the center, back toward Mexico City and back toward Spain. There's trade monopolies. There's aranceles. There's certain kinds of tariffs and taxes that are alcabalas that are levied on trade. And this was kind of untaxed trade that's going on up here. And so it becomes a problem. And San Antonio starts to get this reputation as being, kind of cantankerous or outside the pale of normal Spanish society. But what I think is interesting about what it creates is that you have such a diverse community in and around the San Antonio missions, in and around old San Fernando, in and around these other Indian groups coming in, that you almost have to cultivate these values of tolerance, but also toughness. I mean, there's there's not a lot of law to appeal to. You know, there's these people that it becomes this code of generally kind of a live and let be type of thing. And the way you see this in a really fascinating way is all the different forms of self-government that pop up in this area. You know, you have, of course, the Ayuntamiento, the city council of San Fernando de Béjar, but every single mission community has its own government too. And I think we're just finding out too how much of that is coming. You know, whenever you're a Spanish friar or you're a Spanish administrator and you're writing back to your boss, you know, you always want to look important to your boss. You always want to make it look like, you know, you're the one that's in charge, that's making things happen. But what's really coming out is that a lot of these elections, these choices of leaders from within these mission Indian communities is coming from within the communities themselves. And I know the Moreno sisters have a famous ancestor who's the last Indian gobernador of the San Jose community, and I'm sure many of you other ones too. But I find that fascinating because I struggle to think of any other of such a similarly concentrated experiment in self-government by so many different kinds of people in such close geographic proximity, again, anywhere in North America, as you have going on right here in San Antonio. And it's unique, too, in the way that it very consciously draws on European and native traditions of self-government. Because, you know, the Spanish tradition of self-government gets overlooked a lot in Anglo-American historical circles, just because they're not familiar with it. But, you know, the Spanish system of self-government is very much focused on the town. You know, like the English system is kind of based on these classes. You got aristocrats and you've got tradesmen and you've got whatever. The Spanish system is based on these towns that hold these rights against the king, against the monarch. And so it's these little self-governing pueblos. The word pueblo in Spanish means town, and it means the people, right? It means both things. You know, like this is the core unit of self-government. But also, as we've seen, you know, these forms of self-government that existed in indigenous America too are coming through, and they're not unfamiliar. And anyway, I find this fascinating, and it creates these traditions of self-government that, frankly, you know, San Antonians and San Antonio Mission Indian descendants are willing to die for. So, as Diane alluded to, I've spent a lot of time studying the Battle of Medina, so I don't want to bring every meeting or every talk down to the Battle of Medina, but it's an important event in Texas history. So September 16th, 1810, Father Miguel Hidalgo unleashes the grito that sets off the War of Mexican Independence. You know, it takes off and grows more rapidly than I think he ever could have imagined. It takes off here in San Antonio in January of 1811. San Antonio has its first little kind of mini revolt that then gets put down about 6 weeks later. And Father Miguel Hidalgo also is kind of marching toward Mexico City and then gets defeated and he's fleeing. But he's fleeing back to San Antonio. Father Miguel Hidalgo is trying to get to San Antonio where he thinks the revolt is still burning bright. And sure enough, for the first 3 years of the War of Mexican Independence, the most intense fighting, the place where it is succeeding most, is right here in Texas. And this is what leads to the episodes with Jose Bernardo Gutierrez de Lara, who goes and raises an army in Louisiana. A key part of the army that he raises in Louisiana, the largest contingent are Tejanos. There's also a large contingent of Anglo-American volunteers that come fight too, but the second largest contingent is of Native American participants in his army. Lipan Apaches, Tonkawas, San Antonio Mission Indian descendants, and kind of a few Comanches as well. So what's remarkable for me is that you have at least one moment, this incredible moment in Texas history in 1813, where you have pretty much everybody from Texas fighting on the same side against one common enemy, which is this Spanish royalist force, which comes to meet them at the Battle of Medina. Of course, it doesn't end well for them. August 18th, 1813, Battle of Medina, terrible massacre, 1,000 men may be killed on the field of the battle. Then afterward, the victorious Spanish general marches into San Antonio, kills a few hundred more, occupies the town for months, imprisons the women for almost 2 months, and subjects them to slave-like labor conditions, and throws their children out on the street to starve. And it's this terrible, traumatic event. And the net result of this is that even when Mexico wins its independence in 1821, Texas is far and away the poorest province in the new country, in the new country of Mexico. There's some statistic that if you combine Texas, Nuevo León, Tamaulipas, and Coahuila, the total gross domestic product of all 4 of those states was only 1/300th of Mexico City. It's a fraction. It's very poor, and what Tejano leaders in particular pin their hopes on for economic recovery is Anglo-American immigration. And so at this time, the Anglo-American Republic, starts to border Texas in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase. And over the subsequent 20, 30, 40 years, there's this economic boom that's going on in the United States that is driven by cotton. And of course, cotton is driven by plantation slavery. And so that's this connection here. The numbers are staggering. So going from 1/300th of the Mexican economy in 1821, by 1836, Texas is something like 10 or 15% of the entire Mexican economy. That's how profitable the cotton trade is. Other statistics too, that an acre of land in the United States, in Louisiana, right across the border, is worth $1.25 an acre at the time. In Texas, initially, it's worth 12 cents. You can buy it for 12 cents. It's these huge profit margins that they're able to make on this. But what this does, there are other statistics too, I guess, by 1836, Tejanos and native Texas residents are outnumbered not only by Anglo-Americans, they're outnumbered by enslaved peoples who were brought in by Anglo-Americans. So you have this major demographic shift and you have this major economic shift. At this point, the economy of Texas, or of San Antonio, of old Texas, that had been pointed toward native North America beforehand, is suddenly reoriented almost entirely toward the United States at this point. So everyone knows what follows. You've got the War of Texas Independence, 1835 and 36. You've got kind of this realignment. But part of what happens in this realignment toward the Anglo-American world is there's a different regime for thinking about Native American relationships in the Anglo-American world versus in the Hispanic world. And there's different kind of myths that have traveled with these different cultures along the road. So the great myth always of Hispano-Mexican relations with Native American groups is this myth of mestizaje. It's this vision of mestizaje, this idea of mixing, and it takes various forms. I mean, from the moment that Cortez conquers Mexico City, he has his men are marrying the nobles of the Tlaxcalans and even of the Aztecs and stuff like this. You've got this mixing going on into the 20th century with Jose Vasconcelos and La Raza Cósmica, the cosmic race and stuff. Well, kind of the corollary to that in the Anglo-American world is sort of this myth of the inevitability of Native American decline, or really the inevitability of Native American disappearance. And it's odd because this trope shows up in Anglo-American writing even when they're first landing on the eastern seaboard of the United States. So they're still outnumbered, 500 to 1, but still this is kind of the lens through which they see things. And I bring this up because what it is, it's very much a vision of separation from native and colonial worlds that in contrast, again, kind of to the Hispanic legacy. And so, with 1836, Texas independence, 1846, annexation to the United States, there comes to be this prevailing view of the Indian and the colonial and the settler community can't really coexist. And there's some interesting clues to this. There's some interesting artifacts of this. For one, this is, I think, the origin of the kind of San Antonio being known for its history that I think a lot of us kind of recoil at today, because there's a quote here from Olmsted is his name. He's the guy who designed Central Park in New York City. He travels through Texas in the 1850s and describes very lovingly, he's enchanted by San Antonio, but he describes it as being characterized by its odd and antiquated foreignness. And the funny thing to me about that phrase is, the foreignness is kind of obvious, that San Antonio is still very much kind of in this other cultural tradition, this Hispanic and this native, cultural tradition. But the idea of antiquated, it kind of belies, again, this kind of Anglo-American story or view of inevitability of disappearance, of the presence of so many, peoples from speaking different languages from different places is evidence of something being old, something being outdated, and something, that will decline or will disappear. The other that I think is kind of interesting, and that I think speaks a little bit to the councilwoman's district even, is I want to show you guys something, and this is not the best way to show it. All right, so this is a map of the city of San Antonio, and this is kind of shows how it's grown by annexation over the different years. Well, I want you to notice this little triangle, right in here in this spot, because it's interesting, and you'll recognize we're in that triangle right now. Here's a little overlay to make it a little easier to see. But you can see that even to this day, it's an odd little pie wedge that doesn't quite fill out where the rest of the annexation has occurred. And even when it happened, it was very late to get annexed up into this point. I mean, those are the San Antonio Mission Indian communities. Those are the San Antonio missions that were the last to be absorbed into the city of San Antonio property. And I think that's a fascinating historical legacy, but both of the presence of these self-governing communities, but also, frankly, too, the kind of this view of apartness, that Indianness is apartness or somehow from some other identity. But I want to talk about that too in the context of why it becomes challenging even today to recognize the indigenous legacy of a place like San Antonio, or like, you know, people in this room, that again, you know, very much the Anglo-American image of Native Americanness is tied to reservations. It is tied to, and it's encoded in federal law. I mean, you basically cannot be an Indian, a legal Indian in the United States unless you had some ancestors that were on the Dawes Rolls, on the federal Dawes Rolls, taken in between like 1901 and 1914, which meant basically your people had to be on a reservation at that time. Well, the experience of Texas is just different. That wasn't the only option. If you were in Minnesota, that was your only option. You know, it was extermination or reservation. There was another option in Texas, and that option, it comes through a quirk in Texas history a little bit, but for one, it comes from the border. By having the border, by being able to play back and forth across the border, there's a relief valve, there's an escape valve. But the other thing that goes on too is that at the very beginning of independent Texas, the Texas Republic, there's a huge debate going on in the very first session of whether Tejanos are going to be considered citizens of Texas. And, you know, actually Jose Francisco Ruiz is one of the great, you know, leaders against this. He's the only Tejano in the Texas Senate at the time. Navarro was in the House, I think, maybe Seguin too. I can't remember the order of those, but it was Ruiz in the Senate, and eventually this idea does win for obvious reasons, that, you know, Tejanos are going to be citizens of the United States. But you got to remember too, the United States in 1836 has a very clear, you know, kind of caste system. You know, you're either white, you're black, or you're native. And natives are still technically kind of outside the sovereignty of the United States government. John Marshall had, like 6 years earlier, made some rulings that would kind of change this, but still technically they're considered outside the pale of the republic at this point. And so what do you do with Tejanos that genetically at least are a little bit white, a little bit indigenous, and in some cases a little bit of African descent also? And so where do you fit them in this group? Well, the decision is that they're going to be able to be citizens. And so it doesn't necessarily mean of equal treatment or of equal status or anything, but at least on that box of citizen or non-citizen, they're allowed to be citizens. And so what that creates for the next 100 years, it is vastly preferable if you are of some indigenous descent in Texas and you can get away with calling yourself Hispanic or Tejano, you're going to do it. You're going to check that box. Remember that Native Americans could not be citizens of the United States until 1924. Again, it was this idea of separate sovereignty was kind of this idea. And so what happens is that, you know, that a lot of the indigenous Texas blood and population disappears into the phrase, you know, that becomes more common later on is, of course, just Mexicans. And then you get this funny terminology of like having to distinguish between like Texas Mexicans and Mexican Mexicans, and like, but you know, that's the phrase that comes to, or the term that comes to capture these people. And so the irony too is that today, you know, you get pushback from especially federally recognized Indian tribes sometimes of Mexicans playing Indians. You know, this is the critique of like, no, these groups, if they're not federally recognized, then they're Mexicans playing Indians. The irony that I think the evidence is starting to support is that what you actually have in Texas is a lot of Indians that for 100 years have been playing Mexicans. And because it was simply preferable and smarter to do so. And that to me is an exciting possibility, because I think people's minds are changing to this. They are getting more used to these different kind of paradigms for thinking about indigenous identity in the United States. And I'll even say, you know, across traditional political party spectrums too, people are starting to think about this different. And so, you know, this is why I think the work that the Mission Indian Descendants are doing is so important. And also the charge too to the rest of you also is like we've got to record these little evidences of this. You know, like the songs were recorded of the Moreno's mother and the stories and the stuff like this. Like we've got to collect these things. The baptismal records, the census records. We had a great panel a few months ago that I invited the Moreno sisters to be on, where we had 3 federally recognized Indians, and we have the Moreno sisters that were up here with their group, and they brought with them, you know, their 300-page genealogical background proving Indianness. I mean, we got 300 years of records here of their ancestors, you know, being very clearly identified as Indians, and all these Spanish baptismal records and burial records and marriage records. And honestly, that's a much higher level of proof than being on one reservation in 1904 for the one day that mattered, apparently, when that was the case. And so things are changing, I think, at the Texas State Legislature. You know, the Tapilam had a bill 4 years ago to try and get recognized as a tribe. They got through the House, but not the Senate. The Lipan Apaches this year got one through the Texas House, couldn't get it to the Senate. I think some things are going to change on this front, but it's data matters, you know, and so collecting these stories and collecting things like this, it makes a big difference. So I want to shamelessly plug a little bit this Battle of Medina documentary that may be coming out, and then I'll come back to the topics we talked about. But the connection here between these two is really what. Well, let me show you the trailer first, and then I'll talk about it. Oh, the volume's going to be funny, isn't it? I didn't think about this. Hold on. Well, shoot. You know what? You just have to watch the pretty images behind me, and I'll kind of narrate over this. But the point and the context that we set up the Battle of Medina in, so switching themes a little bit for a second, is for me, there's always been something odd about the Alamo story, about the way we fixate on the Alamo story. Because, it's a defeat. There's no other defeat. At least it's a defeat from the perspective of the people who celebrate it the most. And there's no other defeat in American history that gets celebrated like that. And honestly, there's poll statistics that show, especially younger people today, most of them don't know who actually won the Battle of the Alamo. And nobody mistakes who won Pearl Harbor. Nobody thinks that General Custer won, the Battle of Little Bighorn. But for some reason, the Alamo is different than that. And the conclusion I eventually come to is that the early myth-making around the Alamo actually comes out of Tejano leaders like Seguin, like Ruiz, like Navarro. And what they're actually consciously doing is linking it back to this Battle of Medina, to this idea that suffering can form the basis of a new people, and that defeat is what gives dignity to victory. And it's an idea that Anglo-Texians in the 1830s actually very quickly embrace. And I think the idea of Seguin and other Tejanos was it can be this. The way we suffered at the Battle of Medina and the way Tejanos suffered in the 1835 and 36 battles too is something now shared with these kind of newer Anglo-Texians, that we've all suffered for Texas in some way, which if you think about it too, appeals back to the entire colonial experience. Life was hard in Texas. It was, whether you were indigenous or Spanish or whatever, it was hard for those 100 years. And it's this really neat idea of identifying, shared suffering as the basis for something. But it's resonating now. And I'll say this, that, people that even traditionally you might not have thought would have really keyed into Tejano history have gotten really in, I think, to the Battle of Medina, because they can see the continuity of it, the continuity and the way that it links the Texas past and even Texas identity to kind of this Spanish past. And then it's not much of a step further that if you can link it to even Anglo-Texian identity to Tejano identity, what you're actually doing is linking to a form of indigenous identity. Tejano identity is very much linked to native identity. And so the good news we got is KLRN is going to show this documentary in September on PBS here in San Antonio. So super excited about that, and we'll come up with some kind of viewing date or something to We need to do that. No, and actually we're even talking about doing it maybe Brooks City base or something like that. But again, I'll circulate it back to is, as more evidence comes forward during these periods, like when I was growing up and learning Texas history, and I love Texas history even as a kid, I think you'd have had trouble finding these stories even if you tried. And so I think it's where we have to nod to the really good work of academics in the last 20 or 30 years doing really unglamorous work, like digging through census records and realizing, oh, wait a minute, like this guy is compadre to this guy, so this is how they're related, so this is why then he sells him this. Like it's explaining, it's putting together the dots in a way that makes it a narrative, that makes it a story that we can hold our attention and listen to, and it brings these things to life. And I think we've done that really well with kind of the Tejano piece of early San Antonio history. I think the next step is these little fingerprints of the indigenous legacy in the Texas identity. So anyway, thank you guys. Record your stories, record your stuff, and yeah, I will take questions if anybody wants to talk or ask about anything. So.
Ask questions. Because if you try to ask me the questions later, I may not know the answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the Apaches, they are not state recognized now, or they are?
No, the state of Texas does not recognize any Indian tribes. There's only 3 federally recognized tribes, even in Texas, none of whom are actually originally from Texas. I mean, so you got the Alabama Coushatta in East Texas, the Kickapoo down by Eagle Pass, and the Tiwa over in El Paso. So, yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of tribes in Texas, but none of them are federally recognized. That's a real shame.
So yeah, federally recognized, and people don't understand what's the difference of a federally recognized.
So they can hear you on Facebook,
okay.
Otherwise they can't.
Okay, nobody knows what a federally recognized Indian is, or
yeah,
Native
I mean,
American.
the big difference is the access to benefits. As a part of the treaties that the United States government made with these various tribes over the years, I mean, for example, if you are a Native American in this country, you're guaranteed health care. If you're not even in a state recognized tribe, you can't access that. There's veterans benefits, education benefits.
Only on your tribal land, not anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics, right? Or it's got to be through Native Health, right? And Native Health does have clinics in different places, right?
It's very guarded.
Yeah.
You know, benefits are very guarded,
Yeah.
and they're not just really like you don't get anything for being an Indian.
Well, and look, and that's the tension that federally recognized tribes feel, right? Is like they don't want it to feel like just anybody can claim, to be an Indian now and get access to these things. Like you understand where they're coming from a little bit, but the hard part is the whole paradigm that defines federal Indianness in Texas or in the United States isn't going to work for Texas. Like we had a different historical different colonial experience. Like they're not identified in the same way. They're identifiable, but not in the same way.
So nobody understands the Congress isn't very free with their money, so they're not
Exactly, yeah.
in the Indian bill.
Well, and look, and state recognition doesn't get you everything that federal recognition does either. It helps you access some programs, but by no means all of them. So.
Right.
Well, and to be clear too, let me say this because this is important. Comes up. State recognition, for example, confers no gaming rights. Federally recognized Indians do have rights under the Federal Indian Gaming Act or whatever. This is casinos and things like that. And often economically, this is a big part of what's going on too. Is existing tribes don't want competition on that side. But it's important to distinguish that everybody knows that state recognition confers no gaming rights, nothing under federal gaming laws.
So Robert Soto won the
That's right.
the case with the
Eagle feathers.
Eagle feathers, and I don't know if people understand that story.
And that's a unique one too because so the Lipan Apaches, for example, have a particularly strong and incontrovertible, documented history of the court's language in that was, of government to government relationships. And there's also the unique fact too of that in 1846, most of the tribes of Texas Indians met with the new U.S. federal commissioners and in a way did accept some form of sovereignty or whatever. Now, there's no Mission Indian descendants, there's no Mission Indian groups represented there. But anyway, but the Lipan don't sign that actually. they leave the meeting. And so they're a really interesting case because they're so numerous, their contacts are so incontrovertible. That's why they're an interesting, a compelling case to get some form of state recognition. But part of the argument that's interesting to me about the Mission Indian Descendants group is that they're coming at it comes here from a different angle. And theirs is if the key to this is documentation of genealogy, there's no one the Spanish were nothing if not great record keepers, and these mission records are scrupulous. And I mean, we use them for so many other things. They're good enough for land records and title deeds and whatever else. Like, they ought to be good enough for this other stuff.
We've got them all. We've got birth, marriages, deaths, land records.
But the truth is, so in
The Indians didn't keep records.
But the Spanish, and that's the thing that's different about the Mission Indians from every other Native American in the United States.
The level of documentation is unparalleled.
Yeah.
Even again, I mean, the Navajo don't have records that go back this far. Most Apache groups don't. It's
most
unmatched.
of them, it's oral history.
Yeah.
Most Native groups are oral history.
They were on the Dawes rolls. They're on the Dawes rolls.
But ours is even further than that because our records go back to the 1700s.
But they weren't on a reservation in 1904. And frankly, if you on a census record, they're probably listed as Mexicans
at this point
in 1904. And these, and so in 1978, they change. The U.S. government, really in the 1900s is pretty anxious to start closing the door on recognition, of Indians. And so 1871, the U.S. Congress declares that they won't even make treaties with Indians anymore. It's reservation or whatever.
Which is probably okay because the Americans didn't keep the treaties anyways.
There's some jokes to be made about that. And so then from the 40s to 70s, you have this Indian Claims Commission, which is set up, which is meant to supposedly definitively and forever resolve all Indian claims to land and stuff like that. But I mean, its goal is to dispense with claims, but does it reach justice? Probably not. And so in 1978 they pass. I forget the name of it, but it's the law that now governs federal Indian recognition. There's only 17 tribes that have made it through since 1978. There's 574 or something totally federally recognized tribes in this country. There's another 60 or so just state recognized, none in Texas. But the last tribe that got through, it took them 30 years and about $30 million of legal fees and everything else. So I mean, it's a tough hurdle.
What is it that's keeping, what is it that the state's looking for And are the standards so high that nobody's ever going to get that recognition?
So the state doesn't really have criteria. There's a 7-part test for the federal criteria, and I can't remember what they all are, but they're things that you would think of. It's continuity of community, it's connection to a specific geographic region. It's the kind of things you'd look for if you were trying to say a people was from a place. Texas doesn't have that. So Texas had a Texas Indian Commission until like 1987 or something like that. Yeah, when it was sunsetted out. And honestly, some of that came from, well, anyway, so there's no prescribed criteria for what would constitute Indian recognition in Texas per se. So it's something that, and it has to come through statute. There's no agency because there's no agency that exists in Texas to do it. There's 2 ways to have state recognition. One is through your state Indian agency, which doesn't exist in most states anymore, including Texas, or it's just through statute. The legislature passes a law that says we recognize them as having exercised substantial government authority or substantial government duties over a certain period or whatever. So it's not a prescribed test, but this is kind of why, as we're navigating this with like the Lipan Apaches and other groups, is we're trying to parallel some of the federal language. The idea being that, if you convince people that these people, and especially the Lipans in particular, maybe they've been here for obviously indisputably for hundreds of years, that in their case, they fought alongside actually most of the Anglo-Texian governments for a long time. They were in the Rangers, all these things like, I don't know. So it's informal, and we're having to try and kind of create the case as we go.
It's interesting that you say that there are no prescribed ways for them to be state recognized, and yet the state does not make that easy. And I say that because you guys are now working with the state legislature. You did this past legislative session to get state recognition for the Lipanos. We did that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So just because you take it in and ask for state recognition and you follow all the laws does not mean that they're going to approve it.
It's just up to them. It's just up to whether the House.
And is that something that we as the electorate should start talking to our representatives and saying, hey,
and I'm going to tell you, the momentum we had this session was special. It's never been like this before. There's something is in the air. People's ideas are changing about this. That I think it's going to happen. Maybe even as early as next session. But oftentimes legislature takes 2 or 3 sessions. To get something through. And so, but absolutely, talk to your representatives. But I'll tell you, the Lipan Apache one passed 103 to 30 or something. You know what I mean? Like, bipartisan. Like it's not
passed both
just the House. No, it never came to a vote in the Senate. So, but I think we had the votes in the Senate, honestly. But it was late in the session, and so anyway, yeah.
Probably should have had them work through the summer to get some of these other.
Yeah, it's not how the Texas ledge works. Not how the ledge works. Yeah. Hey, over here.
Hey, how you doing? I liked the part that you touched on for a minute where you said Indians playing Mexicans because, like most of us here, I'm related to so many people in this room, and because of that, a lot of the work I've done researching, looking at the actual baptismal records. One of my third great grandmother, she is from. It says the ranch she was from, her family, Indios de Rancho de Bocas. But the moment she comes to the United States in 1914, she's Mexican and everyone else afterwards. But just before she crossed over the border in the 1870s, one of her children passed away, and her children are listed as hija de India de whatever. But that all goes away the moment she comes to the U.S.
Which, by the way, was smart. She did the smart thing. Like, if she had come in, into the United States listed as an Indian, it wouldn't have been as good for her. That's a great story. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just saying, how many of those have you seen in your research? Coming up through.
No, I mean, and so the question of the challenge too is, we're so many generations down now. We're all so mixed up in so many different ways, genetically, that, even traditional concepts of like blood quantum, was this idea for federal Indian tribes where, you had to, some tribes had it, some didn't, but, you had to satisfy a certain percentage of your blood, of your ancestors had to be Indian to be Indian. Well, the problem with that is that's also a prescription for extinction. That eventually, unless they're intermarrying, everyone's intermarrying with everyone, then like it can become a sinister way to extinguish, Native American identity. And what I think is funny too is, so if you compare it, so if you do some rough math today on like the average genetic composition of someone who identifies as non-white Hispanic in Texas, I forget the exact numbers, but it's like 20% indigenous or something like that. So you spread that out over the percentage of the Texas population that is non-white Hispanic, and basically rough estimate of the 30 million people, in Texas, something like 7-8% of the genetic pool is still indigenous. That's like 2 million Indians. The funny thing about that to me is that's about the same number as English or as German or as Irish when you look at those two. But nobody says the English are extinct. Nobody says like the Germans are extinct or whatever. But and we don't insist that people of German descent walk around in lederhosen or whatever either. Which is also sometimes the expectation. So it just comes from this different intellectual legacy or mythology of what we think Indians are supposed to be. And again, that Anglo-American image was always, it was a very thing apart, and by the way, so this also makes it harder in the Hispanic tradition, especially once it gets absorbed into the Anglo-American world, is, in the Hispanic tradition, they get baptized, they get a baptismal name. Well, they're just Juan Fulano, just like anybody else, at this point. Like they're not, more common, not always, but, in the Anglo-American tradition is they'll translate a name. It'll be John White Deer, it'll be Sitting Bull, or something like that. And so they stand out more in different ways there than they do in the Hispanic American tradition. That again makes them disappear a little bit once they get absorbed into the Anglo-American lens. So
I know that there are more questions, but we're going to take a quick break. There is coffee. And we're also celebrating because the San Antonio Mission Indian Descendants now has our own website. So we're excited. It's been a long time coming, and it's finally here. We've had some great partners come alongside us and walk with us on this journey to bring it to fruition. And so it's slow going, but go and visit us. You'll see some interesting things. We're still adding more as we go along, but celebrate with us today. Let's take.
Absolutely, and we want to thank, because trust me, this celebration part would not have happened if it hadn't been for Emily and Rudy Purificato.
Yes,
These are
thank you guys.
supporters of the Mission Indians. We appreciate you guys.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much. Yeah, so make sure you come and get a slice of cake, coffee. We have coffee now. There's coffee and there's water. But right before we go, Brandon, I want you to do something real quick for me.
we got a raffle.
We got a raffle.
All right.
We never do this, but the San Antonio Zoo gave us a 4-pack of tickets. So it expires at the end of this year, so you better hurry up and go. Okay, so Brandon.
Brandon's like, please let it be for me.
I didn't get a coupon, so I can't do it either way.
Okay, the number is 691164.
That's oh, how is the family 4 people?
It is a family of 4.
That's too perfect.
And she just had a birthday this week.
Oh my God!
Yeah, turn it this way. She's so cute.
All right. Good job. So now the whole family gets to go to the zoo.
Please come and help
So yes,
yourself.
come help
Take
yourself.
about a 5-10 minute break. Also, bathrooms are right across here if you need to go.
If you brought your T-shirts, please come back to see me so we can print your shirt.
And then we'll come. But the fact that you decided to join us here makes me really happy. This has been a really great presentation, and Brandon is always someone we really enjoy having. So obviously, we'll put him somewhere on our calendar for next year. But we're going to go through a few more questions and answers in just a few moments. But let me say that next month's presentation is going to be with Dr. Billy Kaiser, who's going to be talking about scalping Indians. He's going to throw an additional piece on because the scalping Indians is a presentation he's been in a couple of different places already. He's going to throw an additional piece instead for us that has to do with the Apache Indians in the Texas Rangers. So we hope that you will join us on July 12th. But going back to some of what Brandon was saying a little while ago, a couple of questions I want to ask you, Brandon.
Yep.
We were talking about how Texas does not have any federally recognized tribes. And this is absolutely true.
What is 3 federally recognized tribes?
Well,
no state
none that are indigenous to
right.
Texas.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And one of the challenges that we encounter, and we see it on Facebook all of the time, this was thank you. The distinction between reservation recognized Indians and the mission Indians may not seem large to some people here, but when you're on Facebook and you see it all the time. There's a big distinction. I think that the government set the federally recognized tribes as a way, you mentioned this a little while ago, as a way to start eliminating the indigenous communities. Who would have known that some of these tribes would grow really large and you can't get rid of them? But that distinction that they made is a distinction that now the Indians in the reservations now make against the mission Indians. And so the comments that I see all the time, and it's interesting because you think we are all Native Americans. It's one thing when the government creates a division, but another when we perpetuate that and continue to follow that division. Because some of them will say, you're not on the DOS records. How do you know that you're Native American? And it's like, I've got the records, mine go all the way to the missions, and they're like, but you're a pretendian.
Pretendian is the word that comes out. Yeah.
Precisely.
Well, and I mean, so, 2 things, one thing that is changing that, of course, is genetic testing, but DNA testing. But I still want to emphasize how wildly unreliable that is for a lot of purposes. I mean, for one, again, it goes back to this idea, this almost like 1900s European idea of like,
right.
A people have to be like a discrete ethnic group and they have to be somehow genetically pure or concentrated and stuff. And we underestimate how much mixing always was going on between native groups. And I mean,
yes.
you can have people that, well, and today we do this too. People marry into people from other cities, and like,
absolutely.
And so it's wildly imperfect for determining what group you belong to, and also the databases are inadequate and stuff like that. But I think it does at least expose the lie to some extent that the indigenous fingerprint on the genetic population of this country, particularly within
right.
certain parts of it, is way higher than the Indian rolls would lead you to believe.
Right. And it's interesting that you say that because I'm not saying that there are no Native Americans out there that are not 90% indigenous or 100% indigenous, but I'm going to say that those numbers are probably, the percentage of those individuals are probably smaller than what everybody would like to believe. And so, because even among the Native Americans, for us, I can tell you that we are from several different tribes, because when you look at the missions, behind the mission walls, there were over 200 different tribes represented there in totality during the mission period. And when you're in there, you're not stopping and thinking, I'm from this tribe, you're from this tribe. They needed the representation, so they had one governor that represented all of the Native Americans in that group. And you know what? They're intermarrying each other. So they may have come in as one particular tribe. By the time the mission period is over, there's a lot of mixtures. So you can't say, I am pure Apache, I am pure Borrado, I am pure anything, because we've all intermarried. But even before the mission period, you've got a lot of different tribes that are intermarrying between each other. Yeah, sometimes they're fighting, and sometimes they're marrying each other, they're doing peace treaties and things of that nature. So there's no pure anything. So that is just one of the challenges that we face
Yeah.
today.
And I don't know, because I try to be optimistic about most things, like, maybe there's an opportunity in some of this, of that the concentration, the blood quantums, even of federally recognized Indians, mostly goes down with each generation. We keep mixing around with each other in this country. And so maybe that's part of what I feel like may make it easier with time to admit other people into the group, to say like, okay, well, yeah, pretty obviously these people with 300 years of baptismal records are indigenous in their sense too. And I don't know, I don't think it necessarily is our responsibility to feel charitable toward people that are mean to us, but we talked about this over here a little bit too. There's real money at stake here, right? And that's part of what federally recognized Indians are being defensive about, is that there's funding that is provided if you are a recognized Indian, and that they have fears about spreading that out too thin and stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't know that there is a kumbaya solution. Yeah. But intellectually and from an archival and documentary standpoint, I think it's incontrovertible, and so I'm interested in continuing to push on this. But again, it goes back to this is why we have to document everything as good as we can,
And I'm glad that you mentioned earlier about the different groups not having to prove what percentage they are of Irish or African American or anything, but Native Americans do. That is not something that we do, just in case anybody's wondering. We do obviously want to make sure that if you want to belong to our particular group, that you have your pedigree and that you can prove that your ancestors were at the missions. But no one is going to say, what percentage are you of Native American? Because, that's too little. You can't be. As long as you can find your ancestor, that's all that matters to us. It doesn't matter how many other people they married out there. It's interesting. We find a lot of Native American groups. Some of them are blonde. Some of them are redheads. Some of them have green eyes. But they are still Native American. So if we don't make a distinction for any other group, I don't know why we make the distinction for Native Americans. If you can find your ancestor at the mission, like I said, you're one of ours, let us know. Come by and see us. But does anybody have any questions on anything?
Hold on. Can I ask a question to the group?
Sure.
So we were having a good conversation about this, about Mr. Presas here was asking about his last name. So, he's got Mission Indian descent. His last name is Presa or Presas. And, obviously where my mind goes to is that all of the irrigation, the acequias in this area, they all start with presas, with a little dam, a little dammed up water impoundment to raise the water level, to run it through the ditches and irrigate. And so, my mind is like, well, you might have had an ancestor that was a dam builder or that did something like that. I'm curious, as Mission Indian, as the missions are being secularized and they're entering the general population, I think first names were typically, saints' names, baptismal names, or something like that. What was the convention for last names?
And that's something that we have talked about within our group also, because, and this is a conversation I had with another cousin who's not here today, just in case you who are cousins start looking at each other. It's not with any of you guys. It's another cousin that I have who said, we have our coat of arms in Spain for the De la Cruz. And I said, Native Americans did not have last names. Before the Europeans arrived here, we did not have any last names. Those last names came with the Europeans when you're being baptized and your testigo is so-and-so. That's where you're getting your last names. But we didn't have any, so that coat of arms is not ours.
So it's coming from as the compadre of the baptism or something,
yes.
Or something like that?
The other thing I said, prior to the Europeans arriving here, nobody here was Jose or Maria or anything like that. So all of those names that we have today, even if we try to go back 400 years, 500 years, you're going to lose them because they're not there, because none of them were Gonzalez or Saldivar or anything like that. None of them was Jose or Maria or Guadalupe or anything like this. So it's the last name that you have, that probably came with colonization, and it probably came because your ancestors was out there helping with the acequias.
That was a question. Like, would they be given last names based on their trade or where they lived or something? Or
Well, some of them had nicknames that, and I think at some point they may have stuck as a last name. And the reason that I say that is because I was looking at one just this past week, and it was interesting because he was not even a Comanche, but his nickname was El Comanche. So I think that these people, as we've looked at them, because we look like from the beginning, at the beginning of the 1700s, and you follow them, one of the things we have found that in the early 1700s, when the missions are starting, some of them are Indios, but by the time secularization is over in the early 1800s, now they are Spanish. And that was always the purpose of the missions. The purpose of the missions was to bring in the Native Americans, convert them to Catholicism, get rid of their language, their traditions, their culture, and teach them the Spanish language, teach them how to eat like the Spanish, teach them how to dress like the Spanish, teach them the language, so that when you're done,
how to pay taxes like the Spanish
how to pay taxes. Well, and all of that part of the process, so that when you get out from the mission, now you are a good Spanish citizen who are paying your taxes to the crown. You become a productive Spanish citizen. So this is why on some of the records, some of the records from the church, some of the ones that you saw at the beginning were Indios, and at the end they're Spanish. I will say, I think mine was very rebellious because at the beginning he is Indio de la Misión, and when he is dying, though he is the governor of the Indians, let me just tell you, he's still shown, on his deathbed, he is shown Indio de la Misión. So he may have been rebellious because he never came out as a Spanish.
Any questions?
Questions, comments? Yes, sir. Joe, yes.
Yeah, so are you familiar with the Ferdinand Romer?
Oh, no.
So Ferdinand Romer published a book called something like, I think it's just called Texas.
Uh-huh.
So with the large influx of German immigrants in the 1840s, he essentially took it on himself to come visit Texas and write a guidebook. And along the lines of your statement about the Indian recognizing the benefit of becoming Tejano or Mexican, he goes and he visits. So he visits Valero, he visits San Jose, and he visits Concepcion. Because this guy is a consummate scientist, naturalist.
Yeah.
Inquiring minds want to know. He says, show me this stuff. This is a unique place. Well, he says the missions are inhabited by a few miserable, impoverished Mexican families who have built their dwelling, their little lean-tos against the walls and things like that. And I...
What year that was, Joe?
It was 1840s, okay. 1848. He was here when we achieved statehood.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are rough years for the missions, but yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, he's a German. He wouldn't distinguish Indian from Mexican. These were just, dark people, local people, whatever. And so, he, number one, provides this kind of picture of neglect. Like when he goes into Concepcion, he says the walls are darkened from smoke. They rode their horses into Concepcion, into the chapel. And so it's, and then he visits a camp of Lipan, and this one of my favorite, along those lines, one of my favorite accounts is that you're like, well, did you knock at the door or something? He just goes up he says, I go to their teepees and I look in, and there's a young man and a young woman, and they have a couple of kids, and he's just like walking around in there.
This is a thing. The Germans have a lot more curiosity toward this kind of stuff too. A lot of those communities negotiate their own pieces, with these tribes.
Yeah,
there's
like
other,
in Fredericksburg.
Theodor Gentiles is a German painter in 1840s and stuff who goes out, into these communities and paints inside a Lipan village and paints, inside the missions where they're at and stuff. I'll also point out, in 1870, I think, or 1873 is the first year that you get kind of where someone makes a bird's eye map of San Antonio, and it's one of these classic maps where you're kind of imagining you're like 1,500 feet high, looking down on the city. They're beautiful to look at. The missions, where the missions are just left off. So they go to the spot. They're an embarrassment to a modernizing city who's trying to get a railroad, who's trying to do whatever. They just kind of erase them. And obviously they're still around, and they were still there and striking, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of the, it's the shabby part of town, right?
Yeah.
I want to address something that he just said, because he's talking about the 1840s, and it goes to what you talked about a little while ago. You're talking about all the battles that occurred here. So battles don't leave pristine cities. So when this German individual came by, he obviously didn't know the history of what had taken place here in the last 10, 20, 30 years.
Wasn't that long ago, yeah.
Precisely, of the things that had happened, because all of these missions were pueblitos. And when you study and I've been reading was it Rick Moses' book on the Battle of Medina. So you talk, and you're looking at each one of these battles that seems to be happening one right after the other. And the Native Americans are part of those battles. I don't know if they went willingly, but I suspect that they did, because it's impacting their lives as well.
Well, you've got, like, from those years there, from like 1800, 1824, the missions are being secularized, which means in some cases the lands are getting sold off, and so you no longer have people living on site with the plots that they're farming as often. You still have some. You still, there's still good walls. There's still good roofs in some cases. But yeah, I mean, there was a battle in Concepcion in 1835. There was anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and not just that. The Crown actually gave residences from the missions to the natives that were there, and they also gave them labores. But one of the situations that we find that the king may have wanted certain things done, that's not always what happened here. So while they may have given it to them, after a while, those lands start being taken away from the Native Americans.
No, they end up in disproportionate concentrations to wealthier folks in town. End up with way more of those than.
Actually, some of them ended up with the land agents.
Yes.
That were assigned to the natives.
Yeah. And frankly, some names that we recognize from Texas history, like it's a little unsavory,
The Alazan court, you will find. I would imagine that if most of these people do their DNA, they will find a lot of them are Apaches. The bird people, I believe, were also Apaches. So when they're getting moved out of the missions, because the missions is a great place for anybody wanting to seek refuge. So if you are a prestigious person in the city and you can push somebody else out from the mission, they're going to allow it. They're going to allow it because you're a person of prominence.
Like Indiantown is a fascinating thing. So, where Apache Alazan courts are today, until 1937, it's called Indiantown. I mean, it's full of Indians, primarily, Apaches in this case. But, it becomes the first public housing project in the United States as they raise Indiantown to build Apache Alazan courts. It's not called Apache Alazan courts because, like, the Apaches are their mascot or something. It's called, that was the Apache town, in 1937. And those kind of, like, connections so recent into the present, like the communities around, these missions, I think it opens people's minds, it blows their hair back when they realize, like, oh God, this is not ancient history, Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Brandon?
Yes, ma'am.
What question? She's like, I forgot.
It's going to be a good one.
Alex?
I was going to say, you were talking about the German artist, Gentiles.
Yeah.
Friedrich Petri is another one, and I think anyone who has the books on. Just to rehash that real quick. A German artist who moves to the Hill Country in 1849, I think, because he's only here for about 4 years before he passes away and trying to ford a river. But his paintings are probably the only good contemporary slices of life of specifically the Lipan Apache, and I think the Comanche, although I can't be too sure on the second one, but I do know for a fact that there were a lot of portraits, kind of like George Catlin from the Northeast would move all the way inward to take these little slices of life or portraiture of the different natives that he ran across while he was traveling. So I think Friedrich Petri's art is all at the Bullock Museum.
Is it? Okay.
I think most of it's there. It's not very well cataloged online, so if you try to Google pictures, you don't see the best resolutions of it, but I think you can ask the Bullock Museum.
You can find some really nice ones on the Library of Congress as well.
Really? Cool.
You had a question? You just have to talk a little loud because this is for YouTube.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's my understanding that actually the missions here, really in some ways they did fulfill what the Franciscans had in mind, because their idea when they took the land and separated it among the people who lived there was that they would take these materials they had there and build their own towns. And of course it expressed itself differently here because of, the banning of Catholicism when the government changed, and so we didn't have the huge cathedrals in the town square. But it seems to me that in some ways it really was more representative of what the Franciscans were originally hoping for.
Well, and remember in general, the Spanish mission program in Texas was an economic failure. They founded these, and the word mission tells you too. Most of them were authorized for like 10 years at a time. It was like, you're going to do this mission. The idea was that they were meant to be self-terminating. They were meant to be, you would turn them into good subjects, good whatever. And
Probably one of the long-lasting here.
And this one kind of kept going. Yeah, this was like, what was the old like Reagan line of like the closest thing to eternal life is a program. It's like, anyway, like these are missions that wouldn't die because they had people in them in ways that other ones didn't, and so it's in some ways a success, but probably not a financial success in the way that the Crown had designed them.
Is that why they were moved?
It has very high visual output.
What's that? You mean turn it off? Oh, sorry, yeah.
So do you think, Brandon, that is why other missions were closed and this one stayed?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the other thing that was unique too about the San Antonio missions is they were so close to each other. There was actually rules about how far they were supposed to be apart, and each one of the San Antonio missions broke that. But something to that cluster effect probably helped out, for mutual defense, for mutual aid and support. And I mean, the other thing is the numbers, the populations of these missions, they swing wildly. Like from year to year, you can have 200 people in San Jose one year and then, down to 30 the next year. I mean, and honestly, in some of the smaller ones down here, never had more than 30 or 40 or something in them, so they were...
And sometimes, depending on any epidemics or diseases of that nature that are happening, and sometimes the Indians just got tired, they got up and left.
Yeah.
So you're going to see the population at the missions going like this.
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild, and but again, the San Antonio missions stand out there was nowhere else in Texas really that ever had this kind of endurance. Again, the Juarez mission and some of the San Elizario and the stuff like that over in El Paso Juarez were also had fairer success than most of the other ones. And I think what they share in common, which I think is interesting, is there were native traditions of agriculture preceding the Spanish arriving there too. So there was something here about a common form of life maybe that makes them a little more successful.
There is something that Diane says, and I'm going to let her say this, about the success of the missions and of San Antonio and how it becomes a pattern that is used throughout Texas.
I usually say that there would be no Texas without San Antonio, and there would be no San Antonio without the missions.
Yeah.
And there would be no missions without the natives.
No, there's no town here. I mean, there's other presidios too that they found all around and over Texas, and they never become permanent establishments. I mean, there's dozens of them. There's the one up in Menard. There's on the San Marcos River. There was one. There was San Carlos. There was San Vicente. Like, they're all over and they never last. The presidios don't last on their own. And no, it was the weird confluence of, you had the three legs of the Spanish imperial stool here. You had the Franciscans, you had the military, and you had the civil that all come up. And honestly, what sustained it for that long was the trade with Native North America that was coming through the missions and the mission connections and things like that. I mean, that's what made San Antonio last in ways that none of the other 57 or whatever missions in Texas did. Mm-hmm. Because they had that confluence of factors. So.
But you even talk about the structure.
Yeah, well, I do want to say that the San Antonio missions, it's very important that we realize that if you want to talk about a confluence of people, right, and a diversity, you find it behind the mission walls, because we weren't just all Native Americans behind those walls. We were Native Americans, we were Spanish, there were some Canary Islanders in there as well, and there were some mulattoes, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at Mission Indians, you see our DNA, and we are a mix of so many different things because we chose to be one people. Outside, everybody was different. Behind those walls, we were one, regardless of who you were, regardless of your ethnicity or where you came from. If you were behind those walls, you were one people.
And when the battles occurred outside those walls,
we came out.
They participated in that.
We all came out.
I mean, the 1745 peace with the Apaches was partly because they defeated the Apaches in open battle, and it was a unit of 100 Mission Indians coming out of Mission Valero in particular at the last second that kind of saved the day. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so I always say that if this country wants to know what it is to coexist, all they have to look at the missions. Look at the San Antonio missions. Look at what we were doing behind those walls, because we were one people.
Tolerance and toughness.
Yeah, we weren't looking at somebody and saying that person is different from me, so they're not a part of me. You know,
let them in here.
Yeah, you know, in our DNA, we carry Native American, we carry European, we carry African American. Yeah, all of that. We carry all of that in our DNA, because behind those walls, we were one. And nobody can ever change that, you know. So we are the melting pot in our DNA.
Yeah.
Okay?
Anybody else?
The cultural molcajete, somebody described it as like the
I
missions
love
were
that.
a cultural molcajete, you know?
I love that. Any other questions? Any comments?
Thank you guys.
Well, let's
We
thank
wanna
Brandon
thank-
one more time for his.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
My
and
pleasure.
Where is the one we wanted to? There it is. We want to present it to you.
Oh,
here.
yeah. This thing?
So yes.
Yeah.
So Brandon is a huge supporter for us, and the Texas House of Representatives recognized the San Antonio Mission Indians Descendants Group and the work that we do. And we were so happy to have Brandon there with us that day supporting us. And so, Brandon, this is for you, my friend.
This means so much to me. This is so nice. Yeah. This is great.
So it is the proclamation from the House of Representatives. So
And a
look
great
at that.
And just so you know, it is actually a signed resolution.
Wow. That's amazing.
Isn't that awesome?
Thank you guys. Can somebody get a picture of us? There we go.
Got it.
Wait, let me open it up right here so you can see this too.
To the bottom. We can't miss that.
Hold on.
You're going to mess it up.
That's
Thank you so much. So,
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
So thank you, Brandon.
Thank you.
He's been a huge supporter of us from the moment we met him, and we can't thank you enough for everything that you do for
Y'all do
us
important work.
and for coming out. This presentation is going to be on Facebook Live, but it's very limited time. It's going to be downloaded tonight and uploaded to our YouTube channel. If you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, we ask you to please go over there. We could not go live on YouTube because we need 50 subscribers, and we're like almost halfway there.
This room can finish that out.
Yeah, we're almost halfway there. So if you'll go and subscribe to our YouTube channel at salmontx.org, you'll help us, and next month we'll be on Facebook Live. Yes, ma'am. We will put a link on Facebook. Yeah, we'll put a link on our Facebook page today so that you know where to go.
Blast your email list.
Yeah, and all the other past presentations are already uploaded to our YouTube channel. So if you've missed any of them, you can go over there and watch them.
Tell them
Okay.
about our website, how they can find it.
So you can just go to www.samidtx.org is our website.
And SAMID, of course, is the acronym for San Antonio Mission Indian Descendants.
Okay. Before we let y'all go, I do want to let you all know that we are already in full swing planning our Firebed Social and Holiday Market coming November the 8th. It will be held here at the Mission County Park Pavilions. We are looking to form committees, so if anybody would like to volunteer to help us get this thing up and running, we've had a lot of success in the past years. We want this one to be bigger and better than previous years. So if you're willing to come alongside us and volunteer, please let us know. If you know anybody who wants to donate, make a donation towards this effort, please come and see us. We have been very fortunate this year that we've already received 3 in-kind donations for our silent auction. Our silent auction raises funds so that we can do scholarships for our mission descendants so that they can, who are seeking higher education or already in school and, are continuing. This year, it's not a very big one. We do have 2 scholarships going out this year, one for 1,000 and one for 500. So if you have a student that is going to college and they need a scholarship or just want a scholarship, go to our Facebook page, download the application. The instructions are there. We do ask that you do a pedigree. I will say this, even if you are not a mission descendant, go ahead and apply. Go ahead and apply, and I would love you to fill out that pedigree because I would hope that this would lead you to a journey of discovery about your own ancestry, whether it's here at the missions or somewhere else. I encourage you to do it. I do want to say that we were very fortunate that we've gotten 3 in-kind donations this year that are going to be auctioned off in our silent auction. The first one was from Kendra Scott. It's a beautiful piece of jewelry. We also got one from SeaWorld that is going to be 4-pack tickets. We're going to do a little basket for that. It's going to be like a $400 value. And we got a foursome at the TPC San Antonio. That's a $750 value. So, bidding starts at $750. I'm sure it's worth a lot more than $750, but we're still, actively seeking those in-kind donations. So if you know anybody, bring them in.
Let me also encourage you to come to this year's Fry Bread Social. Does anybody else here know who Nan Blessingame is? Oh my gosh, for those of you who do not know her, please look her up. She's an amazing lady who has had...
She's a Native American artist. She's a designer.
She's a designer who has had her pieces have been on fashion houses in New York, in California, but she's had some in Austin also, and she's going to do one for us. So we encourage you to come out. It's going to be amazing. I've been following her for years, fell in love with her stuff. It's just amazing stuff. And Emily had a question?
So I'm Emily Purificato, and I work for the United States Air Force Department of Defense, and I invited 2 of our students who wanted to meet some Native Americans.
Welcome.
Have you come on in.
Because I said, okay, because some of my students said, well, what do Indians look like? Right? But not these 2. So they're from Italy. And go over there and tell them who you're with. Oh my God.
Come on up and introduce yourself.
You're okay.
And your name is? Come on up this way.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Rita.
Rita? Oh,
My name is Rita. Nice to meet you.
Dimitri. Nice to meet
Dimitri,
you.
nice to meet you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Rita. I'm a warrant officer, and I come from the Italian Navy. I'm here to do a specializing course to become an air traffic controller, and I will be the first time instructor in the United States. And yes, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm really glad also to my country, which have given a chance to stay in these beautiful places. Because the first time that I came here, there were a lot of people who were sociable, who were trying to help him. Because at first, I came at the airport in Chicago, and I was scared because everything was new. And I met a lot of wonderful people, and I'm really glad to be here in these beautiful countries.
Well, we're glad you're
here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Dimitri Caso, I'm from Italy too, I'm in the Navy. I fly on the Navy helicopter as a radar operator, and also I'm a rescue team. So I'm here to face an English course, and then I have to go to Pensacola, and yes, U.S. Coast Guard will teach me how to rescue jet pilot fallen in the sea, and also all other skills yet. So I'm glad to stay here to know this country and to speak English more. And it's a very beautiful experience for me. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We also want to
Let me
thank.
just say real quick, and Emily, just in case you didn't catch it, this is with the Defense Language Institute, and she and many other people like her teach individuals from other countries how to speak English. So thank you for a job well done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank y'all. Thank y'all for being here.
Margot, I'd like to mention, it's also part of, you want to tell them, Doretta, because you were part of it also. It's about security cooperation around the world. So you want to tell them a little bit about it?
Well, yes, people, when I used to go and tell our work, they would say, why do you teach foreigners? What are they doing for us? Well, they're keeping our world secure and keeping our presence in different countries. And many of the teachers go overseas and we teach, we're assigned teaching assignments. And so we have opportunities. This parent has been to Saudi Arabia. I've been to Vietnam and Uzbekistan, where that is. I sign up for things and go, oh my gosh, there's actually a country here. So, but it is a very serious job, and it's a very rewarding job because we get to meet a lot of students like that, and we make lifetime friends with other people in the country. They also meet other people at the DLI, other countrymen from other countries, and they become stronger friends. So it's a really nice beginning to think that this is in San Antonio, and our city has so much to offer.
Absolutely.
So, thank you.
We also want to thank Ray Salinas from Congressman Joaquin Castro's office for being here. Thank you so much. We try to foster these relationships and build these relationships because the missions are important and the descendants are important, right? We need to make sure that we continue to elevate these descendants. We need to, because if not, we go back to what we were before and it's just Mexicans.
But it's interesting because we talked about coexistence within the missions, and the work that you guys do over there at Lackland teaches coexistence among many nations. So thank you for the job that you guys do.
And you also came out to Lackland.
We did.
And spoke to our many students, and they really, really loved it.
Awesome.
Oh,
We had a fantastic time.
We also have a program at Lackland that other volunteers you can get your very own student to take home with you.
Awesome.
You can participate on Lackland at the Amigo Socials and be a presence, and that way you can contribute your knowledge and your desire to help out in the situation through the Amigo program.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
We have one more
Thank
question
you.
right down there.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'd just like to invite everyone on behalf of Friends of Mission Branch Library and Gardening Volunteers of South Texas to our Monday night series we began 2 weeks ago. On Monday nights from 6 to 8 p.m. we're having special presentations, different book authors and things in the room here. We arrive at 5 and get going around 6. And this Monday we're going to have a first time ever presentation by Greg Eckhart. If you all follow the history of water in San Antonio, you may have been to his presentations, which are really amazing because he works at San Antonio Water System in the wastewater division, but his passion is about water and the history of water, and he goes to estate sales and looks for documents. I mean, he's the reason that we know for certain that there were alligators in the San Antonio River first anyway, because of the research he's done. So
that's scary.
This summer he's been giving presentations on each of the sacred springs in Texas, but he's going to bring the first time ever his new presentation about the history of water and landscaping in San Antonio, which will be right here in this room, Monday, free and open to the public. And
That's awesome.
It's going to be tremendous.
Awesome.
We've got a few other people here that I just wanted to make sure that I introduced, and you guys would tell us which group you're with, because we're always laughing. Ms. Rosalie?
Well, I'm with Canary Islanders, Los Mejereños, DRT, DAR, and I think that's it.
Let's see, well, right now I'm second vice president for Canary Islanders. I'm past president of Los Bajareños, also DRT, DAR, and I just got accepted to 1718 Final House.
Awesome. Yes, you have. He's our cousin. He's
So
not.
many cousins.
He's Mario's son. He's Mario's son.
Joe is going to be our speaker in August. Joe, you want to just tell us your name and what your title is?
My profession is a geologist, and so part of my talk will start with a little bit of the geology in springs, which Brandon alluded to, according to water.
Awesome.
We're interlopers.
We love interlopers.
Through the World Heritage email that came in. So we're actually local tour guides and we're trying to understand the best.
Awesome.
We are so happy that you guys are
Over here.
Absolutely. Can I get you guys to introduce yourselves? I know we've already introduced, but not to the board.
I'm Norbert Ortiz from Sonora.
Did you guys hear that? No. Norbert Ortiz from Sonora?
Sonora, Texas.
Sonora.
Texas.
Welcome.
You sent me and my love from Sonora, Texas to via San Antonio.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome.
This is your son?
I'm Norbert also.
Welcome. Welcome. And you've been with us before in our writing workshops, right?
We try to make as many as possible.
We're glad to have you here.
We are glad to have you all here. Thank y'all so much.
My name's Ellen Brooker. I'm actually Chickasaw on my dad's side. My grandpa was half Chickasaw. I am a retired high school history teacher. I taught high school history for 32 years, and I'm a docent at the Institute of Texan Cultures, which the building is gone, but the programs are still around. We're hoping to open up again at the Frost Building sometime this fall.
Awesome.
So keep your eyes out, your ears open about what we're going to do. And I'm always wanting to know more information because as a docent and a history teacher, I'm always trying to bring in more information. And the more I learn about Native Americans all over the world or all over the country, the more I realize I don't know.
Same here.
And it's so different, and that's why I'm here, is because I'm still learning, and we have to keep learning.
Absolutely.
It's important.
We're glad to have you here.
Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you again to everybody who is here today. We hope to see you next month, July 12th. Dr. Billy Kaiser.
The topic will be "The Business of Killing Indians" is the title of next month's presentation. So, yes, please come, take home some cake, take coffee, get some water, pastry, whatever. Please. Please. Thank you for coming. We'll see you next month.
Thank you so much.